Hello, all you internet people. Welcome to our fourth episode of Potter Tongue. My name is Chris, and I'm very excited to be here. As a Harry Potter fan, something that's inescapable are plot holes. Sooner or later, you're going to hear about them. But more often than not, there is an answer to them. Whether the person who brings them up isn't looking for the answer hard enough, or they just haven't read the books enough times. Today, I will have the humble task of confronting some Harry Potter plot holes. I'd like to call out YouTuber Merphy Napier. She's a YouTuber that's all about books, and she's made a few Harry Potter videos which I enjoy. She really sticks to the book story, and I admire that. She doesn't get off topic with the movies or other stuff. But it's been about 2 years since her last Harry Potter video. She's made different videos about things that don't make sense for each of the 7 books, as well as a separate Harry Potter plot holes video, which we'll be addressing today. That's what I'll be focusing on today. Harry Potter plot holes, as discussed by Merphy Napier. So, let's begin.
So I've mentioned plot holes in the Harry Potter series a few times in a few different videos on my channel, and every time I mention it, I get a few requests to make a video on the plot holes in Harry Potter. I've never really thought much about it because it just seems like a daunting task. But then I recently posted a video called My Unpopular Harry Potter Opinions, and in this video I mentioned again the plot holes in Harry Potter, and I had an overwhelming number of requests to do a video on it. So here I am, I'm doing a video on it. Now this is not going to be an exhaustive list of all the plot holes I could find in the entire series, just because that would be a really long video. So I'm not going to talk about the minor plot holes or the super frequently discussed plot holes. I'm just going to mention one major plot hole in each of the 7 books. So we're going to be discussing 7 plot holes throughout this video. But before we get started, real quick, just want to mention we are going to be talking about book canon. I know that a lot of people consider every word ever written by J.K. Rowling as canon for the Harry Potter series. That's fine, I respect that opinion, but that's not what this video is going to be about. We are discussing book canon. So any plot holes that J.K. Rowling has filled after the fact through Pottermore or through her tweets, we're not discussing here, but feel free to discuss those more in the comments if those are platforms that you follow her on. The other thing that I want to mention before we get into it is that if you happen to be very sensitive about people who are critical to the Harry Potter series, this video probably isn't for you. This is going to be a nitpicky video. I'm going to talk about plot holes. So if that sounds like something that would upset you, probably don't watch this video. So here we go, 7 books, 1 plot hole per book, starting with book 1. In the end of the Sorcerer's Stone or the Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell goes after the stone. The way he does that is he sends an owl to Dumbledore from the Ministry. It is an urgent owl saying that they need his help now. Dumbledore rushes off to go save the day and then promptly decides he isn't needed there, so he turns back around and comes back to rescue Harry before he dies. Or after he passes out. I don't think Harry would have died with or without Dumbledore there, but Dumbledore at least took him out of the 3rd floor traps and where Quirrell was currently dying. Anyway, here's the issue. The kids run to find Dumbledore in the afternoon time, and McGonagall stops them and tells them to basically go back to their rooms because Dumbledore has already left. He is flying to the Ministry. Then the kids wait a few hours, sneak out after it's bedtime and they're not allowed to be out of their corridors. They sneak to the 3rd floor, pass all the obstacles, and get to Quirrell. Are you already seeing the problem here? Why did it take Dumbledore hours to get to the Ministry? Why did he choose to fly at all? Sure, you can't operate in Hogwarts grounds, but you can if you take a step outside of Hogwarts grounds, so he could have just walked to the end of Hogwarts grounds and then apparated into the Ministry. He could have used flue powder. He could have used his phoenix to transport him there, as he does in another book. I don't quite understand why he chose the slowest method of transportation to fulfill an urgent request from the Ministry, and then when he realized, you know, I should probably be back at Hogwarts, not here, he chose the slowest route back. I mean, he could have popped over to the Ministry, realized nobody actually wanted him, and then popped back in a matter of minutes, and then, like, you know, not had the whole issue of kids getting clubbed over the head with chess pieces and almost getting poisoned and burned to death and killed by the Dark Lord. I understand that at some point Harry says, I think Dumbledore wanted to give me the chance to try, but I feel like he could have done that without, you know, being on the opposite side of the country and, you know, being apart from the children entirely.
Okay, let's stop there. So she really has two issues with this. One is the time it takes for Dumbledore to get to the Ministry and back while Harry, Ron, and Hermione do their thing from Gryffindor Tower through the trapdoor and ultimately face Quirrell. And the second one is the manner in which he traveled to the Ministry and back, mainly flying. So just to preface the setting, a little more detail than what she said. Three of them go to McGonagall and try to speak to Professor Dumbledore, but she informs them that he just left 10 minutes ago to the Ministry and will not be arriving back until tomorrow. So she sends them to Gryffindor Common Room. They have dinner, then they stay up in the Common Room until everyone goes to bed. They get past Neville, Peeves, through the trapdoor, through all the obstacles, till finally Harry faces Quirrell, passes out, and Dumbledore takes him to the hospital wing. So that's the sequence of events. But I think what a lot of people don't take into consideration that bring this up is the actual distance from Hogwarts to the Ministry. Hogwarts Castle, as we know, is located in the Scotland Highlands, and then the Ministry of Magic, obviously London. Just a little reference for you guys. The trip is just about 540 miles total. That's one way. And I did a little research, and you can fact check me on the numbers, but if you were to drive to the Ministry of Magic by car, one way, mind you, it's about 9.5 hours. By car, 9.5 hours one way. And then if you like to fly there by plane, again, this is only one way, it's about 1.5 hours. Right? You can check me on this and see for yourself. But there's another thing she doesn't touch on, which is, yes, he flew to the Ministry, but she doesn't say how he flew to the Ministry because it's never specifically specified. As we know, there are two main ways to fly. There's with the broomstick and then by yourself with your wand. We see the second pattern of flight in Book 7 when the Dark Lord is chasing Harry during the chapter The Seven Potters, when he's making a run for it in Sirius Black's motorbike with Hagrid to the destinated Porky at Tonks's parents' house. He's flying to catch him, as well as Snape. We see him fly when he jumps out the Hogwarts castle window during the sacking of Severus Snape and then flies away like a bat-like creature. So I think it's pretty safe to say that flying in either of those two manners would be way quicker than driving, because you could certainly go faster flying than, let's say, the Hogwarts Express if you took the trip by train or car. But I don't think it would be as quick as the brief 1.5 hour plane flight. I don't think they're going that fast when they fly. So, once again, Harry goes to McGonagall in the afternoon before dinner, and for all intents and purposes, let's say 3 o'clock. Dumbledore leaves, 3 o'clock, 10 minutes later, Harry goes to them. Okay. Going off of what we know with the numbers and the mileage and thinking practically what it would take, that's a good 5 hours one way, nonstop for Dumbledore flying. So you figure he gets there around 8 o'clock. And the trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, leave Gryffindor Tower around midnight when everyone goes to bed. And they gotta make their way down through the trapdoor, like I said. And by the time Dumbledore comes back, let's say a little faster, maybe a half hour quicker, that's around 12:30, 1 o'clock, give or take a half hour. So with those numbers into consideration, it is very, very likely that he could have gone to the Ministry and realized it wasn't needed and immediately came back by flying, and the time frames for both parties' actions would line up consistently. Now, the question is, why did he fly? There are other magical forms of transportation. So she addresses apparition, that's the big one. So, yes, you could apparate when you step outside of Hogwarts into Hogsmeade, but it's clear that she's never read Quidditch Through the Ages, because if you know anything about how magic works, time and space matter with magic. There's a reason why wizards don't apparate from one continent to another, let alone from country to country. The consequences are very disastrous if you fail with splinching. But even so, apparating 540 miles is no easy feat by any means. And with Dumbledore having an overnight trip coming back the next morning, he's gonna want to fly because, he's going to be taking his time on the way back. But again, unless he's apparating from one place to another, all the way to the Ministry of Magic, I just think that's pretty silly unless you just fly, because that's too great a distance to apparate in one go. And second form is Floo powder, which is a very good option. We see Floo powder being used within Hogwarts. Teachers can use the Floo powder network through each other's fireplaces, to get from classroom to classroom. When Snape calls Lupin to take a look at the Marauders map that he finds Harry in possession of, he calls Lupin and he comes out of the fire, green flames, using Floo powder. But it's got to work both ways. He doesn't have authorization to use a fireplace from the Ministry of Magic. There are designated entrances, like the bathroom that we see in Deathly Hallows. They go into the toilet and flush themselves in. That's one example. And then the third example, we got the apparition, we got Floo powder, and then Phoenix teleportation. This is, we could just chalk this up to, maybe Fox had a burning day that day, you got to take that into consideration. Maybe it just, the stars aligned for that situation. But that's just something I don't hear people consider. But I don't think that one's a pretty strong one. But I don't agree with her on that one at all. So I think I covered everything. The time frame of when they traveled, and then different means of traveling for Dumbledore. And that being said, let's continue with the video.
Book 2, Pipes. This is actually one that one of my subscribers commented on my unpopular Harry Potter opinions video, and I have not been able to get it out of my head. The basilisk. It's a large creature, and it travels the school through the pipes. How large are these pipes in these walls? I mean, are all the walls in the Hogwarts castle a mile thick? Do you have to walk a mile just to get from one classroom to the next classroom? I mean, you'd only be able to do like 3 classes a day, because you would take an hour to get to your neighbor class. Imagine if you had to go to like a class that was 3 doors down. You'd be walking 3 miles. Who designed this castle? Who did the plumbing? Why would they have such giant pipes that they could fit this basilisk that he could just travel through the walls and like send Harry on a wild goose chase that first time that he stumbles on Nearly Headless Nick and Mrs. Norris? Like, why are these pipes so big? Why did nobody complain that it's taken them so long to get through these ridiculously thick walls?
Okay, let's pause it there. This can be answered in 3 simple words. Undetectable extension charm. With Hogwarts having a rough estimate of 1,000 students per any given year, then you add on the teaching staff, not to mention the house elf workforce in the kitchens. That's a lot of waste that has to be moved on a daily basis, and magic solves a lot of problems. So it doesn't take much to think of the answer to that one. Undetectable extension charms. Come on, Murphy.
Book 3, The Secret Keeper. Everybody likes to talk about the Marauders map whenever they talk about plot holes for book 3, but I want to talk about secret keeping. So our whole story starts off with Harry's parents being killed because they went into hiding and they needed to enlist a secret keeper, which, if you don't know, is someone who knows the secret location of something and then no one else knows of the location except for the people involved and the secret keeper. So if any outside party would want to know where the location of the secret thing is being kept, they can't get it. There's no way of attaining it unless they go through the secret keeper, and the secret keeper willingly gives up the location. It is book canon that the secret keeper cannot be forced to give the information. It has to be given up willingly. So in book 3, Sirius explains that James and Lily wanted Sirius to be the secret keeper, but Sirius convinced them to go with Pettigrew because he didn't think that Voldemort would expect Pettigrew, and he was afraid that Voldemort would get to Sirius and try to torture the information out of him. But that's the whole point of the secret keeper. You can't get the information out of him unless that's willingly given up. So was Sirius actually just concerned that he would turn on his friends? But we'll talk about secret keeping even more later on. So I said I'd come back to this point, but for whatever reason I didn't. The thing with Sirius itself and the secret keepers isn't a plot hole. It just doesn't really make sense. The point of a secret keeper is that the information can't be forced from you, but Sirius is afraid that the information will be forced from him. It's just a little bit fuzzy and confusing, but not really a plot hole. The reason I added this into the video is because of something that we learned in book 7. When Bill Weasley, when he and Fleur go into hiding and he tells them that he is his own secret keeper for he and Fleur, which basically reveals that the third party of the secret keeper isn't necessary whatsoever. So that's why I consider it a plot hole, because it deems the whole thing with Sirius and Peter completely pointless. At one point, Sirius talks about how incredibly loyal James is and how he's so friend-focused and all that stuff, so you could argue that he included his friends because that's just his nature. But the reality is, the man's life is in danger. He's trying to protect his wife and his child, who are also in danger. There's no way he would include a third party that will 100% make the plan more flimsy and more likely to get everyone murdered. The thing with Sirius is strange and doesn't really make sense, but it becomes a plot hole in book 7 when we get this information that makes the whole thing redundant and means that either James or Lily could have been the secret keeper themselves, and they all could have stayed alive. So the thing that the whole book is based on, the thing that kicks off the entire story, essentially doesn't even make sense. That's why I consider it a plot hole. Okay, we can move on now.
Okay, stop it there. One, the thing that kicks off the series is not the secret keeping or the betrayal, but the prophecy. We may enter the story and start the story at that point, but from what we learn in the entirety of Harry's story, the prophecy is what starts everything, not the secret keeping betrayal, but that is where we enter in book 1. Few things. Sirius wasn't concerned about having the location forced from him unwillingly, because as we know, that doesn't work to break the charm, the Fidelius curse, sorry. And the reason why he switches to Peter Pettigrew is because he thought that Lupin was a secret spy of the Dark Lord, being a werewolf. He didn't trust him and thought he would give up their position that way by telling him, and so he deemed it to Pettigrew, as why James and Lily asked to have a third person as their secret keeper. Well, that's made apparent in book 7, which I think she's hinting at the secret keeping being used then, but it's what I chalk it up to is that they wanted to be in communication and know information from the original Order of the Phoenix, to still get information and be in contact with people, because if it's just them, then they're isolated from everyone. Like, that's it. But if they have someone say Pettigrew or Sirius on the inside, they can relay information back and forth between them or the Order, telling them, hey, you guys are safe, the first Wizarding War is over, you can come on out now. And this is done the same way in book 7, when Kingsley sends his Patronus message to the wedding party at the Burrow, because that's under the Fidelius charm, and people are only allowed to show up invited because they were invited to the wedding at the Burrow, the location, and that invites them into the Fidelius charm secret. And that's how they were able to get the heads up and have people get in there. Otherwise, the Dark Lord and his Death Eaters could just walk up to the Burrow. No, they couldn't touch them. They were protected in there. That's why they were able to hide Harry there, because of the Fidelius charm. But because they had a lot of people in on it, which is not recommended, Kingsley was able to give them the heads up with his Patronus message. Same thing with Arthur Weasley and Bill at Shell Cottage. Mr. Weasley sends them a message at Shell Cottage via Patronus message. And yes, Mr. Weasley is his own secret keeper for the Burrow, and Bill is his own secret keeper for Shell Cottage, but they told each other, so it expands the vulnerability, but it's not just limited to them. They're still able to interact with each other, and that's why I think that they wanted to have a third person, so they could have that line of communication with the original Order of the Phoenix. So that's my piece on that. Let's get to the next one.
Book 4, Truth Potions, or Veritaserum, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm actually not sure. In Book 4, after the Triwizard Tournament, which is a whole nother discussion, Barty Crouch Jr. is found out to have actually been impersonating Mad-Eye Moody this entire time by taking a Polyjuice Potion and hiding Mad-Eye Moody in a trunk so he can pluck his hairs out for the Polyjuice Potion. The way that they get all this information and more out of Barty Crouch Jr. is by using this Truth Potion, forcing him to take it, and then he basically spills all his secrets. Naturally, you would think that if this potion is available in the wizarding world, it would be used a little bit more frequently. Like, possibly, when several of Voldemort's Death Eaters came to the Ministry after Voldemort was vanquished or disappeared and said, I was being controlled by him, I wasn't doing it willingly, I'm not guilty. And then the Ministry said, yeah, all right, why not give him the Truth Potion? Why not make sure that, you know, they're not lying and they're not secretly just waiting for Voldemort to come back in power and kill everyone?
Okay, let's stop it there. This is actually a valid point. I've heard this quite a lot. Excuse me. Why don't they just use Veritaserum often? Well, it takes a month to brew, as we know from Snape, Professor Snape, Harry. And one of the things that separates Lucius Malfoy from, say, Bellatrix, why she was imprisoned in Azkaban and he wasn't, was that she was actually caught with proof of doing dark deeds along with Barty Crouch Jr. And that's why they were sentenced to Azkaban. As to Lucius Malfoy, it's not specifically stated, but I would infer that along with his outstanding reputation and considerable influence via Gringotts Gold, he was able to talk his way to immunity, if you will, and convince those at the Ministry that he wasn't acting of his own free will. But that is a great point to bring up. But again, you have to think about Barty Crouch Sr., who was just as ruthless as the Death Eaters, as I believe Dumbledore described him as, with prosecuting Death Eaters and people who were convicted or sentenced for dark crimes. He was very strong in imprisoning people and using the Dementors, almost as vicious as the dark side. So someone like that in charge of the judicial and judging cases like that, I don't think he's gonna want to scoop and look around for every itsy bitsy ounce of truth. He's gonna be content with sending as many people as he can to Azkaban. But it's a pretty good point that she's making, but I'd simply disagree. Let's continue.
Number 5, The Trace. So we have to go back to book 2 for the origin of this one, when Harry is at the Dursleys' house and Dobby shows up and does the hovering charm, causes a little bit of mayhem with the Dursleys, and then an owl is promptly sent with a warning to Harry reminding him, hey, you're not allowed to use magic outside of Hogwarts. Putting aside the fact that Petunia probably should have already known that he isn't supposed to use magic outside of Hogwarts because she had a witch sister who lived in a Muggle household who wouldn't have been allowed to use magic outside of Hogwarts. Putting that aside, the issue with the trace is a little bit fuzzy. So the rules of the trace are witches and wizards who are underage have the trace on them, which basically just means if any magic is performed in their general vicinity, then they're basically accused of having used magic and they get a warning or they get expelled. If a minor is growing up in a wizarding family, then the ministry just leaves it up to the parents to keep those rules. So there are inconsistencies with this throughout really all the books, but most of them are done in book 5, which is why it's in the number 5 slot. But I had to write this down because it was too much. So in book 5, first there's Mundungus apparating and then disapparating around Harry. Nothing happens. Then Harry uses the Patronus and the letter arrives. Mr. Weasley tells him not to use magic at any point. Then some people come to get Harry out of his house. Tonks uses Loomis and she packs Harry's trunks using
Don't forget that disillusionment charm.
magic. All of this happens around Harry in a Muggle household. This is all supposed to be done without the ministry knowing about it, yet none of that magic counts somehow. Then you've got book 4 when Arthur comes blasting through the Dursleys' chimney so that he can take them to the Quidditch World Cup. Not to mention when Tom Riddle kills his father and then blames it on someone else by performing a memory charm, all while he's underage, but the ministry never knows. So in all the books almost, there's magic performed around Harry, but it never counts unless it counts.
Okay, this one is probably the most egregious of all the plot holes that she's brought up. First off, she mentions Mundungus Fletcher apparating at Privet Drive, which Harry doesn't see him, he just hears the noise outside. And which is fine, but the big thing, the really driving home point that she's missing is that it's a crime. He gets letters from the ministry, aka Mafelda Hopkirk, because magic is done in front of Muggles. That's the crime. That's the damning evidence that the ministry prosecutes and cares about, is magic done in front of Muggles. Set aside the fact that he wasn't even old to apparate at the time, so they knew that couldn't have been him, even if they picked it up around him in the area. He's 15, he's not old enough to apparate. So, setting aside Mundungus didn't even apparate in front of a Muggle, Harry isn't even old enough to know that kind of magic, so there's no basis in that. And then yes, he does do Expecto Patronum in front of Dudley for 2 Dementors, and yes, that's what prompts his letter for his expulsion, because it was done in front of a Muggle, his cousin Dudley. And then she brings up the advance guard doing all the magic, getting him ready to leave for Grimmauld Place. Once again, that doesn't matter because it's not in front of Muggles. The Dursleys have left the building. The Dursleys have left the building. So they're off to their fake long care award ceremony. So there's no issue with that. It's just, oh my gosh, it's just so frustrating that she doesn't understand this basic usage of magic within the wizarding world. Someone after reading the series once would understand how this works. I just don't believe how she's so confused with how this works. It's only if it's done in front of him. And going back to Dobby, and why he got the letter for the hovering charm was because, yes, Dobby dropped the pudding on the Masons and the Dursleys, but even though elf magic is different than wizard magic, that's a simple spell, hovering charm, Wingardium Leviosa. That's a basic spell every wizard probably knows. He learned that spell in his first year. So yes, he's going to get accused for that. And yes, he got the letter, but because he did it in front of Muggles, it was done in front of Muggles. That's the damning crime. That's what nobody talks about when they bring up the trace or the magic system with the Ministry of Magic. it has to be done in front of muggles. That's the real crime. Oh yes, I almost forgot. The chimney, when Arthur Weasley comes to get Harry from the Dursleys to take him to the World Cup. This is so basic, a first year would know this. I can't believe she brought this up. Talk about low-hanging fruit. But Arthur had special one-time authorization to use that fireplace via the Flu Network with the Ministry to get Harry. Yes, he told Harry, and Harry told them that the Weasleys were coming to get them. He never said how they were going to get him, but Arthur Weasley, assisted by having a job at the Ministry, had special permission to use their fireplace for one time to get Harry. That's why there's no issue or, warning from the Ministry for that usage. It's just a one-time thing, and yeah, it was Ministry approved. Come on. And then the last thing she brings up, which, oh my gosh, I couldn't even keep myself composed, was, okay, she was talking about in book 6 when we go in the memory and the Dark Lord implants a new memory, gives Marvolo Gaunt, his uncle, not his father, his uncle, a new memory after he took his wand, killed the 3 muggles, aka his father, Tom Riddle Sr., and his grandparents at the Riddle house, and then gave him back his wand, gave him a memory, and the reason why they never connected that crime to Tom Riddle, aka the Dark Lord, was because a couple things. Prior incantatum, the reverse spell effect, they could see the last spell that was on Morfin's wand, Morfin Gaunt, his uncle, Morfin's wand. The memory that he gave him with, giving exact details about the murder that only he would know as the murderer, willingly confessing to the murder, as well as being a known muggle hater, jinxing muggles in the town. So that doesn't hold up for how could they not know it was him with the trace? And yes, it was done during the summer of his 16th year when he was 16 years old, but he took very special precautions to not get linked to that crime. So there's no issue with what he did there. Let's continue.
Book 6. All the conversations between Morphin and Marvolo in the Pensive, where Dumbledore is like showing Harry all the memories so that he can explain all he knows about Tom Riddle, and he can speculate what he thinks Tom Riddle's motivations were, and so on. All the conversations between Morphin and Marvolo, almost all of them, were in Parseltongue, which Dumbledore doesn't speak. So I'm curious about how Dumbledore was able to understand the conversations. I'm sure some of it can be left up to speculation, kind of assuming what they're saying, but there's some detailed information that Dumbledore knows that was given through Parseltongue. And at least in the books, there's no explanation as to how he got that information. Also, this isn't a plot hole, but I'm just throwing this in there. We learned about the unbreakable vow in book 6, when Narcissa requests that Snape performs an unbreakable vow with her that he'll protect Malfoy. I just don't really, this isn't a plot hole, I'm just talking now. I just don't really get why Voldemort didn't, make all of his Death Eaters do the unbreakable vow that they would never leave him or turn their backs on him. Because he's like notoriously not trusting. So I don't really get why, but that's fine.
Okay, wow, just wow. Okay, first off, she brings up how Dumbledore could understand Parseltongue in the memory from Bob Ogden when he goes to confront Morphin from his crimes that he committed, Bob Ogden being head of the Magical Department of Law Enforcement. And she says that there's information that Dumbledore gets that was passed between Morphin and Marvolo that was in Parseltongue that Dumbledore could not understand. Well, hold on a second. The only conversations that they had between each other was Marvolo telling Morphin to behave yourself, boy. Stop insulting and giving the Ministry man a hard time. And then Morphin saying to Marvolo that he did a spell that made Tom Riddle Sr., aka the Dark Lord, Voldemort's father, break out in hives. Other than that, there's no significant stuff to what Dumbledore is after concerning Horcruxes and the special mystic unknown details about the origins of Voldemort's family and ancestry. So none of that has any relevancy whatsoever. And yes, Dumbledore has Harry, and for us as the reader to know those parts, to translate the Parseltongue, but there's no significant information whatsoever that is passed between Marvel and Morphin in Parseltongue, and she doesn't give one example because there is none. And then, I don't want to forget something, she did say one thing at the very end. Oh gosh, what was it? Unbreakable Vow, that's it. Why doesn't the Dark Lord use the Unbreakable Vow with his followers, the Death Eaters? Well, if you would have read the books, if you know anything about the Dark Lord, he's immortal. He has Horcruxes. You know, R.A.B., Igor Karkaroff. You leave him, you betray him. What, you last a year, maybe a year and a half? He doesn't need an unbreakable vow. He's immortal. Cross him and you're dead. You don't just hand in your resignation to Lord Voldemort. It's a life sentence or death. Come on. Expected better from you.
And last, in book 7, after the wedding, Harry, Ron, and Hermione apparate away from the wedding because some Death Eaters come and ruin the party. And they end up in a Muggle coffee shop where 2 Death Eaters show up and they have a little battle. After these 2 guys are knocked out, Hermione says that she has never performed a memory charm before. But just earlier on in the book, she performed a memory charm on her parents. She took them out of their memory so that they didn't have a daughter anymore, and then somehow convinced them to move to Australia. Now, throughout the series, we see Obliviate being used in multiple different ways, not just to erase a piece of memory, but to actually change their memory. Like, Obliviate is used in a lot of different ways. So I just don't really understand why it's not considered a memory charm now, but it was then. Just seems like she already performed a memory charm on her parents a few scenes ago. Okay, so that is my video on Harry Potter.
Okay, so my take on this is that for the situation with her parents, when she gives them a whole new backstory and identities and no daughter whatsoever to connect her to her parents in case they go after her family, that is significantly different and what I would say more complicated magic than what she performs in the Muggle Diner Cafe with the 2 Death Eaters, where she just wipes their memory of that incident, their event. They still know who they are and their identities, but they don't know or remember that encounter in the diner. They just would come to and be like, why am I here? So those are 2 different forms of Obliviate, yes, but we see another spell that has that can be used 2 different ways, and that's Expelliarmus. If you point at someone's torso and say the spell Expelliarmus, they're lunged, thrown backwards like Snape in the Shrieking Shack when he was knocked unconscious. But if you say Expelliarmus and point it at someone's hand, aka their wand hand, they are disarmed. So different spells have different usages based on the skill level of the wizard, Witcher wizard, and how much they've learned that spell. Also, there's probably a lot more detail and training that goes into the spell Obliviate that just isn't explained in the books. If you would like to be a part of the Accidental Magical Reversal Squad, you know, those ministry blokes that modified Aunt Marge's memory of her getting blown up. But I see what she's going after, but 2 different usages. And in the book, it is referred to what she does to her parents as an enchantment, but also as a charm. So both things, yes, Obliviate, both a charm, both different usages. One way more complex than the other, but I see where she's coming from. not that significant to the plot, just, you know, different wording might be nice for her, but not that big a deal when it comes to plot. So there we go.
Harry Potter plot holes. There are a lot more. There's a lot of minor ones. There's a lot of major ones. I've discussed some with you guys in the comments of other videos, which I'm loving. Harry Potter is one of my favorite series of all time. I've read it since I was a kid. I reread it regularly. I'm in the middle of a reread right now. I love the Harry Potter series, but books are written by people, and people mess up. So books have plot holes. So this isn't meant to trash Harry Potter. It's just fun to discuss things, and Harry Potter is a series that we love to discuss. I wasn't planning on making a plot holes video, but it was requested so many times that I finally just did it. I'm definitely not trying to trash the series. I love the series. But if you do enjoy hanging out and talking about plot holes, be sure to talk to me in the comments about some plot holes that kind of stick to you in your mind or that bother you. I would love to hear more. Also, I'll leave some articles down below of where I found some of these plot holes and where you can kind of explore and discuss even more plot holes. And keep in mind that the YouTube algorithm...
Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, that's enough of that. So did I hear that right? She didn't even come up with all these plot holes herself. Anyways, something I want to reference was the first plot hole in Sorcerer's Stone that I just forgot to mention was little thing, doesn't make too much significance, but it's worth sharing. Dumbledore says to Harry in the hospital wing that he must have missed Ron and Hermione's owl mid-air when he was flying back from the Ministry. But when Harry talks to Ron and Hermione after he talks to Dumbledore in the hospital wing, they tell him that they were on their way running to the owlery. They met up with Dumbledore in the entrance of Hogwarts before they could send an owl to him. So that just shows you how quickly Dumbledore came back, and I think supports my case for how the time frames for what Harry and Ron and Hermione were doing and what Dumbledore was up to and how far it took for him to travel, how those two coalesce. So just wanted to put that in there. But enough about that. If you're still watching, thank you. I get to tell you about our unofficial sponsor, Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans. A risk with every mouthful. You just never know what you're gonna get. Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans. The next time you're on the Hogwarts Express and looking for that sweet snack, find the trolley witch and pick up some beans. Don't be afraid. She's really just a witch and not, I repeat, not some guard that will impale you with her spikes if you try and make the train. Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans. The best wizarding snack for a true Harry Potter fan. Available everywhere wizarding candy is sold. Whew. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all that's left to do is to spin the Weasley wheel. Weasley, 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 Weasley. Weasley is our king. He always lets the quaffle in. That's why Slytherin sing, Weasley is our king. Weasley is our king. He never lets the quaffle in. That's why Gryffindor sing, Weasley is our king. All right, let's spin the Weasley wheel. Here we go. Let's see who we get. I will spin the Weasley wheel, and as you can see, I was disarmed. Thank you. As you can see, there are 7 different characters, the Weasley children, and depending on who I get when I spin it, will correspond to a note card for that person, and I'll have to do whatever their note card says on the back. And I'll spin the Weasley wheel twice, and yeah, I'm interested to see what I get, so let's go. First spin. Fred! Excellent. My favorite Weasley twin. It says, do a collection video. Okay, so I've gotten this one in the past, and the collection video I did was for Harry Potter themed mugs and cups. So I'll have to pick another item in my Harry Potter collection that I will show off to you guys in the future. So that could be my wands or t-shirts or my chocolate frog card collection. Yeah, so that should be a fun one. Look forward to that. Second item, let's see what we get. Oh no! Fight of the twins. Who's getting that? George. We'll give it to George. Don't want to leave him out. All right, George. It says, tell a favorite. Okay, so I have to tell you a certain favorite Harry Potter thing of mine. So you know my favorite position for Quidditch is Seeker. I've said that in my previous episode about Quidditch. Let's see. You know my favorite magical creature are trolls from my magical creature episode. So let's see. I'd say, okay, let's go with this. My favorite Quidditch player throughout all of Harry Potter is gotta be the Bulgarian bonbon, Victor Crumb. Triwizard Champion takes Hermione to the Yule Ball. Very jealous about that. And yeah, went pro at a young age. And ever since I read Goblet of Fire for the first time, he was my favorite, who I was cheering for to win the Triwizard Tournament. And I truly believe that if he wasn't put under the Imperious Curse, that he would win the entire thing. Get to the cup in the middle of the maze first. I truly believe that. And if you disagree, I will duel you. Wizard's Duel. All right, so that's the Weasley wheel. 2 spins. All right, thank you for bearing with me in this latest episode of Potter Tongue. Like I mentioned in my last video, fun video number 2, we have a new Instagram account. So I will try to leave the link for that in the description for you to check that out. And if you have any thoughts on the plot holes that I've discussed, if you agree with me or disagree with me, you think Mrs. Merphy Napier, knows better than me, then please let me know. And until next time, cheers.